What if I told you Afghanistan didn't actually defeat every empire? The famous phrase, graveyard of empires, is only part of the story. Britain, the Soviet Union, and the United States weren't simply beaten on the battlefield. They failed for a much deeper reason. By the end of this video, you'll understand why military superiority wasn't enough, and why capturing Kabul rarely meant controlling Afghanistan. The term graveyard of empires is a powerful piece of rhetoric, but historically it is a modern invention. While often attributed to 19th century British writers, the exact phrase does not appear in Victorian records. It actually appeared in Western media during the late 20th century, applied retroactively to explain foreign retreats. In reality, the region has spent centuries integrated into vast imperial networks. Afghanistan sits at the geopolitical hinge connecting Central Asia, South Asia, Iran, and the Middle East. It was not an impenetrable wall. The Achaemenid Persian Empire established structured administrative control over the territory, organizing it as the satrapy of Arachosia. Alexander the Great marched through, defeated local forces, and founded cities like Alexandria in Arachosia, modern-day Kandahar, to secure his rule. Centuries later, the Mongol Empire swept through the territory, incorporating the Afghan heartland into its massive administrative system for over 100 years. These historical records complicate the simple myth of an unconquerable land. Historically, foreign powers have repeatedly conquered and held Afghanistan, yet translating modern military superiority into durable political authority remains the true obstacle. The spine of Afghanistan is dominated by the Hindu Kush, a massive mountain system that slices through the territory and creates highly isolated valleys. For any foreign army, this rugged geography immediately fragments administrative control across distant provinces. To move food, fuel, ammunition, and reinforcements, forces must rely on a few unpaved roads winding through narrow mountain corridors like the Khyber Pass. These tight choke points are easily blocked or turned into lethal traps. Severe winter weather further complicates basic movement, instantly magnifying every logistical miscalculation. While an invading force might hold cities with superior technology, their long supply lines remain highly vulnerable to constant hostile disruption. For local defenders, intimate knowledge of this unforgiving terrain acts as a force multiplier, allowing small groups to paralyze far larger, heavily equipped armies. Military control of Afghanistan has historically concentrated on Kabul, but capturing the capital never guaranteed control of the nation. In Afghanistan, power is fundamentally spread out, meaning that central authority rarely stretches past the major cities. Actual influence lies instead with regional leaders, local warlords, religious scholars, and traditional patronage networks that exist completely outside of national ministries. Rather than a single uniform tribal society, the country is home to a diverse mix of Pashtuns, Tajiks, Hazaras, and Uzbeks, each with distinct local loyalties. Consequently, an occupying force could secure the ministries in Kabul, only to find that the formal institutions of the state carried almost no weight in the distant valleys where daily life is actually regulated. In 1838, British planners viewed Afghanistan through the lens of the Great Game, their intense imperial rivalry with the Russian Empire. Seeking to secure India's northwestern frontier, British forces marched to Kabul, easily toppled the emir, and occupied the capital. But tactical superiority did not equal political control. By January 1842, a complete breakdown in local authority forced a catastrophic winter retreat. Of the 16,000 soldiers and civilians who fled Kabul, almost all were killed or captured. Lady Florentia Sale detailed the horrors of the freezing mountain passes in her journal, while Assistant Surgeon William Bryden famously rode alone to the gates of Jalalabad. Yet this disaster did not end British military capability. In subsequent campaigns, British armies returned and repeatedly defeated Afghan forces on the battlefield. The real lesson was strategic. Direct occupation was unsustainable. Instead of permanent annexation, London shifted to managing Afghanistan as a subsidized buffer state. On December 24, 1979, the Soviet military launched a massive conventional invasion, quickly securing Kabul, regional capitals, and the vital Salang Highway. Yet outside these heavily defended urban hubs, the Mujahideen waged a relentless rural insurgency. At its peak, Soviet troop strength reached 115,000, but controlling the vast countryside proved impossible. This resistance survived largely due to Pakistan's inter-services intelligence, which served as an active sanctuary, training ground, and logistical conduit for international weapons and funding. In late 1986, the CIA-run Operation Cyclone introduced American Stinger shoulder-fired missiles to the battlefield. These weapons disrupted Soviet air superiority, forcing pilots to fly at higher altitudes and severely degrading close air support. While these missiles increased helicopter attrition, archival evidence shows Soviet Premier Mikhail Gorbachev had already resolved to withdraw before the Stingers arrived. When the last Soviet troops crossed the Friendship Bridge in February 1989, they left behind a fragmented state. This withdrawal was driven by a complex combination of battlefield attrition, mounting domestic political pressure, and severe economic strain back home, instead of a single military defeat. On October 7, 2001, the United States and NATO launched Operation Enduring Freedom. What began as a swift counter-terrorism mission to dismantle al-Qaeda soon expanded under the Bonn Agreement into an ambitious 20-year nation-building project. While coalition forces maintained total military dominance, capturing cities and defeating the Taliban on the battlefield, they struggled to establish a durable political order. The central government in Kabul, heavily reliant on foreign aid, suffered from systemic corruption and weak administrative institutions that alienated rural populations. Consequently, the newly trained Afghan national forces remained critically dependent on American air support and logistics. On February 29, 2020, the United States and the Taliban signed the Doha Agreement, scheduling a complete foreign withdrawal but excluding the Afghan government from the negotiations. This agreement severely undermined the state's legitimacy, causing its internal support to evaporate. When the final coalition withdrawal neared, the entire state apparatus fractured with stunning speed, culminating in the fall of Kabul on August 15, 2021. Once again, overwhelming battlefield superiority failed to secure lasting political authority. In our next documentary, we examine another critical piece of this regional puzzle: why Pakistan became one of the world's most strategic countries. Subscribe to make sure you do not miss it. The mismatch between military power and political control stems from a basic rule of asymmetric war. Occupying forces must hold territory, secure supply lines, protect civilians, and build a functioning state. This massive effort depends on domestic taxpayers, stable budgets, and political will back home. Insurgents face a much simpler task. They do not need to defeat foreign armies in open combat. They only need to survive. Foreign governments operate on short electoral cycles, constantly shifting priorities as casualties mount. Local actors plan beyond these cycles, knowing that time always favors the side that never leaves. This survival was never a localized phenomenon. Afghanistan's neighbors transformed the conflict into a regional chessboard. Pakistan pursued strategic depth by securing its western border, providing critical sanctuary to insurgent groups. Iran relied on local Shia networks to cultivate political influence. India countered by funding schools and highways, using development as soft power. On the northern and eastern borders, Russia and China viewed Afghan instability through a security lens, fearing the cross-border spread of militancy. This constant flow of external funding, weapons, and safe havens ensured that no military victory within Afghanistan could ever be sustained. A government can occupy every major city and still lack accepted authority. In Afghanistan, true political loyalty is shaped by religion, ethnicity, and local community ties. In some areas, the customary honor code of Pashtunwali determines allegiance far more than any central laws. When foreign-supported administrations rely on patronage and clientelism, domestic trust steadily erodes. These institutions might appear powerful on paper, but to the people they claim to govern, they feel temporary and hollow. Durable governance cannot be imported. It requires local legitimacy that survives long after foreign forces depart. Ultimately, power lies not in winning battles, but in establishing political legitimacy, a lesson foreign nations continue to ignore. Next, we explore why Pakistan became one of the world's most strategic countries. Subscribe for more.